Hold on. Yes, it's working. In this video, I want to talk about two historical figures. Elizabeth I, Queen of England and Queen of Ireland, and William I, Prince of Orange, who was also known as William the Silent. He led the revolt of the Dutch against Spain, and well, that's how the Netherlands gained its independence from Spain. And she, over here, Queen Elizabeth I, was the daughter of Henry VIII, who actually is the one that established what we know as the Anglican Church, because he became the Pope of the British churches instead of acknowledging the Pope in Rome. And Anne Boleyn was the second wife of Henry VIII, and well, he eventually had her beheaded. But I won't talk much about this crazy guy over here, Henry VIII. I'll be talking about Elizabeth I and William the Silent. Why am I talking about these two historical figures? Don't worry, I'm not going to talk about their life cycles. No, you can check it out yourself by either visiting Wikipedia, or I recommend you go to the library and read some books about them. There's much written about these figures. What I'm doing here, I want to put their role in history in context, because both of these both these figures, they revolted against Rome, against the Roman Catholic Church. They both did. Now, before I continue, I want to make one thing plain here. The political situation back then was quite tense. Look, this guy died in 1584 and she died in 1603. Now, I'm taking the time period of 1600. Now, William the Silent died in, as I mentioned before, in the 1580s, in 1584. So that was 2 decades before this political situation you see on this map. But the political situation in those 2 decades didn't change that much. Now, this was the situation. What you see in orange here is Spanish territory. Okay, Spain had a big hold on the Americas. The majority of the Americas was Spanish. The Portuguese had Brazil, most of the shores of Africa, big parts of India, also in the East Indies over here. And Spain also had a big hold in Asia called the Philippines, and many of those Polynesian islands over here. The Philippines also include all these Polynesian islands. That was an autonomous kingdom that's been established. And in 1580, Portugal became part of the Spanish Union, because Spain was a union of two crowns, and each crown was divided in autonomous kingdoms. You had the crown of Aragon and you had the crown of Castile. Both had small kingdoms here and there. So you had Spanish kingdoms, was also seen as the Kingdom of Spain. And Portugal also became a Spanish kingdom, so Spain was the #1 dominant economic force on the seas. However, soon the revolting Dutch provinces would also become dominant on the seas, and they would even exceed the economic dominance of Spain for a short while. Now that was, and then you had the Kingdom of England and the Kingdom of Ireland, which were in a personal union together, which also wanted to expand into the New World. And you had the Jesuits, who were already based in Chipangu or Chipango. Well, it's called Chipangu because Chipangu with the O is Portuguese, so it's Chipangu. That's how they call Japan. How they name Japan, I mean. It also had France. Like 40 to 45% of Europe's population was French. They lived in the French territory, so France was a country to be reckoned with, but it wasn't a country that valued itself that much. But that's another story. Now you understand the political situation in their day. And Protestantism emerged mostly in the north of Germany, in the North Sea kingdoms over here. That's where Protestantism took hold. Protestantism did not take much hold in the Mediterranean region. Now, why is that? First of all, Rome, which is the head of Roman Catholicism, is in the center of the Mediterranean. So it's not economically desirable to revolt against Rome and become a Protestant region if the region you're in is within arm's reach of Rome. Because remember, from Rome there were many ships sailing all across the Mediterranean. So the economy of the Mediterranean was Roman Catholic. So for a nation or a tribe over here to go against Roman Catholicism, it would be costly. Well, you had the um, Islamic caliphate, the Islamic Empire, or and which was divided in many Islamic kingdoms and emirates. That one was dominant on land. So Roman Catholicism and Protestantism were dominant on the seas, and Islam was dominant on land, going from the north of Africa all over here, all the way to covering Arabia, Persia, going all the way into China with big parts of India. And don't forget, the Nusantara region, which later was called Southeast Asia, also had many, many Muslim communities. So that was a unstable situation here. So Europe was a bit isolated, and it was through expansion that Spain, Portugal, France, England, and the Dutch managed to secure their economic welfare. Because understand this, there were persistent attacks from the Islamic world on, into Europe. There were also many Islamic pirates that went throughout Europe kidnapping people. So Europe was under threat all the time since the emergence of Islam. So these kingdoms over here, they wanted to survive and not be dependent on the Mediterranean trade. Because the Mediterranean, even though you had Islamic merchants that traded in peace with Europeans, in general, it was hostile territory. So the Americas became the outlet, and Spain and Portugal, though to their geographical location, they benefited the most from it because it's only about 3.5 weeks from Europe into the Caribbean for them. And they can just take one of these streams, man, and they're there already. So understand that. And Spain and Portugal were Catholic strongholds, just as France. So the Dutch revolting provinces and the English and Irish and English Irish kingdoms, they needed to find a way to prove themselves that Protestantism was able to survive without the economic supervision of Rome. Okay? And meanwhile, the German population had shrunk though to the wars between the Protestants and the Roman Catholics, so there was quite some tension in Europe back then between the North and the South. Okay? So this guy over here, William the Silent, I want you to figure out why they called him William the Silent, so do your research. I'm not going to say everything. I want you to be active also. This guy revolted against Spain. Remember, Spain was a union of kingdoms, was not a nation. Okay? And Spain also, the crown of Aragon also had parts in Italy, which was also part of Spain. So Spain had big parts in the Mediterranean, especially the west of the Mediterranean, and they had the Netherlands, which they received from the Pope. So when the Netherlands, I mean those seven provinces, revolted against Spain, against the Kingdom of Spain, which was really the King of Castile and Leon, they also revolted against Rome. So when William the Silent led the revolt, he knew what he was getting himself involved in. Remember, the majority of Europe's population was Roman Catholic and lived in the south. They lived in the relative cold north. And in the Americas, the north of the Americas was possessed by the Roman Catholics through Spain and Portugal. Remember, Spain as a union was bankrupt at the time of Columbus. So it was through the aid of the Roman Catholics from Italy that Spain managed to thrive. And here's the thing, many Italians were also Spaniards because their countries were parts of the Crown of Aragon, which was Spanish. Okay, that's why you have the name Venezuela. Venezuela simply comes from Little Venice. Why? Because there were many Italians also involved in the colonization process. So the Italians called this Little Venice. Okay? Now you know that also. William the Silent. He eventually, I'm going to skip through a lot of things that happened. You can do your own research about it. He eventually was abandoned by most of his supporters. And that's one thing I want you to learn here. A lot of folks will cheer on you. They will cheer you and, and clap for you when you make your first baby steps. But when trouble comes, when retaliation comes, how many of those people will still be around? Well, this guy found out the hard way that many of his people turned their back on him. He became isolated, and therefore he was an easy prey for the Roman Catholics who wanted to take him out, and that happens. He was assassinated. So, let's go to this figure here. I'm not going into these titles of Virgin Queen and all of that. This redhead was a woman on the throne. A woman on the throne, well, that was not common at the time. And because she wasn't married, that brought another controversy with it. So you had the Kingdom of England, and also the Kingdom of Ireland, so the English, the Welsh, and the Irish seeking acknowledgement and recognition by the world as a Protestant power. But now they had a female on the throne. And having a female as a head, female as a leader, goes against the Bible, goes against biblical principles. While the Roman Catholic nations, the Roman Catholic kingdoms, they had males on the throne. Well, at least male figures, because we know that the trans elites or the blue bloods of the world, they love to transgender their offspring. And, well, I'm not going into that right now, but you get what I'm saying here. So, this woman over here, she survived a lot of controversy. And she managed to keep England and Ireland together. Remember, she was also the Queen of Ireland. Many people forget about that. And in Ireland, there was a big controversy between the Protestants in the northeast and the rest of the population, which wanted to remain Roman Catholic. She kept them together, and eventually she died. When she died, her cousin James from Scotland took over the throne, and England, Scotland, and Ireland had one king. And at the time, as I mentioned before, France was quite populated. 40 to 45% of Europe's population was French, and the kings and queens of England also claimed the throne of France. And to some extent, they were able to exercise power on France, despite the fact that France also had its own king. So France was like a war zone between the claimants of the territory from England and the cult in Paris that wanted to keep the territory to themselves. So, how do you judge the role of Queen Elizabeth I? You look at the fruits, okay? And to be frank, she had influence on British history. Of course she had. She was one of the heads of state, okay? But here's the thing. She did not, I'm sorry this, she did not do that much during her reign. She was quite diplomatic, which was quite reasonable, understanding that the Protestant nations were a bit isolated when it comes to maritime trade. So she was quite diplomatic, also with the Muslims, and that is what prevented the British Isles from getting into bigger trouble. Okay. At the same time, you had the Dutch rebellion, which also meant that England now had a partner close to them, the Netherlands. So they had to partner together, not only because the Dutch had to sail past England for trade, but also because in the North Sea, those were the two powers that mattered. Denmark and Norway, Sweden, and Finland, those were very thin populated and those were not that active yet on the world scene when it comes to maritime trade. Internationally, I mean. Well, there was a time before this period, during the Viking era, in which Norway was quite dominant, but that time was over. In this time period, these two people managed to secure the legacy of Protestantism in the North Sea region. But there's another element to this, and I want to point it out. William the Silent, and you can disagree with me, I'm not going to fight you, but he was not smart in the sense that he didn't look at the bigger picture. Elizabeth I, however, she saw what happened to her father's household. She witnessed the rule of Mary, which was Mary the First, which was her half sibling, and she also witnessed the terrors and horrors that her elder sister brought on the English people. So she realized that she needs to act wisely. Okay? Maybe it's because she was a woman. She thought, you know what? Let me be a bit more emphatic in my policies. But I'm not sure where it was that. She wanted to secure peace for the Protestant population of England. So there, Protestantism could flourish over there. Well, they had their form of Protestantism, which was Anglicism. Nevertheless, they wanted to be separate from Rome. William the Silent, however, did not look at the bigger picture. That's why he was abandoned by most of his supporters. And it's this abandonment that also contributed to his assassination. Now, why was Elizabeth I assassinated by the, I would say, the fanatic Roman Catholics over there? It is because she looked for diplomatic relations. With trade, she wanted to win over people. And I know that the pagan rulers of this world, they worship Apollo, they worship the beast, okay? But besides the pagan rulers of the world, you have common people or pagans in general that want to trade, that want to just get ahead in life. And if you manage to win those people for you, you got some support. That's why the diplomatic attitude of Elizabeth I. And it worked. She remained alive until she died. Well, of not of I wouldn't say natural causes, but she was not assassinated. Okay? He was. Some would say, well, Rashid, he's assassinated because he's a man. Remember, people tend to take out the rage on men. Now, it's not only that. This guy led a revolt against Spain, but he did not come up with an economic plan to secure the future well-functioning of the new republic they established. And if there's one thing you need to know about running a country is that you need to have a stable and running economy. Without a stable and running economy, you can't have a country. So how did this guy and the people that supported him think that they could just fight against Spain, which was quite powerful in the world and backed up by the Roman Catholic Church? And below them, you had the Kingdom of France, which was another Catholic stronghold. So how could they think they could fight against Spain, therefore also fight against the Pope, and at the same time not have any alternative economy for their own? Well, that would end up disastrous, wouldn't it? And it did. Elizabeth I, however, she was smart. She looked at the bigger picture, and she and those that administered things on her behalf, they looked at the economic welfare of England and Ireland. Now, this does not mean that they wanted everyone to be well off. They just looked in general that their realms had to be prosperous. And the way to achieve this was either through diplomacy or by tricking your enemy to concede onto you. Now look, how do you have to view these two people? Were they anointed by the Most High for what they were doing? Some would say yes, but I doubt that. These were both political figures which had their own interests that they wanted to maintain, and even if they were real believers, the world around them couldn't stand them. The fact this guy was assassinated reveals onto you that he had quite some enemies. Well, I just want to point that out in this video that these two historical figures, they went against Roman Catholicism, they went against the Jesuits, and they also went against the covert control of Europe that was enabled by the Vatican. However, only one of them looked at the bigger picture and had some reasonable alternatives. The other, that is this guy over here, did not have a reasonable alternative. And if you don't have a reasonable alternative, then it's not wise to get rid of the old, because what are you going to replace the old with once the old is gone? Look, I'm not judging whether these people were good people, bad people, and all of that. No, I'm just telling you, they were trapped by the political and economic and social situation of their time. So they did what they could within their reach and within their means to show what they were standing for. Learn from these two historical figures. Always make sure to look at the bigger picture in line with Christ to have reasonable alternatives. Don't just have a will without being able to account for that will. That didn't work out well for the Dutch that revolted. Well, that's it for now. Be at peace.